Yeah, maybe she's just having a couple of days. Of doing stuff from home. His honest teaching, teachings on Saturday. His honest is going to teach on the Hotshot Sutra. Yeah, Saturday 1:30. All right, let's start with the Hot Sutra. Upper straight to the Aya triple gem, thus did he hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vajra mountains in Rajgira, together with a grand community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage strain who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extension of ignorance, and so on up to including no aging and death and no extension of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on the dwelling of the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata om gate gate para samgate bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the worlds of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. In the moment, yeah. We could do it. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations that I collect by listening to the teachings, I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations that I collect by listening to the teachings, I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations I collect by listening to the teachings, may I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. All right, good afternoon. So yesterday we spoke of self-cherishing and self-grasping according to Geshe Tsultrim's presentation. I wanted to begin with looking at the other presentation that we had before, and then I think that it helps to understand how self-grasping and self-cherishing work together. So that's one thing that we're going to discuss today. Then we're going to briefly look at the benefits of cherishing others and the drawbacks of cherishing ourselves. And then we will look into what we began with today, which I think that can cause your brain to hurt if you don't think about it too much. Or if you think about it too much, then it can give you kind of quite a, I guess, confusion, but we can probably make it slightly more simple. So let's begin with just reminding Seth that yesterday Geshe Tsultrim said that he thinks that you can say that cherishing a self is a type of self-grasping. It is observing myself with an attitude or with a mode of apprehension of I exist inherently, I exist by way of my own characteristics, I exist independently. And then it comes with a certain qualification of, therefore, my happiness is more important than others' happiness. That's according to Geshe Tsultrim what self-cherishing is. Now, another possible way to understand that is to say that self-cherishing is actually its own individual mind. It is different to grasping at the self. So grasping at a self is grasping at an inherently existing self. Once we grasp at an inherently existing self comes another type of consciousness, which is self-cherishing, which thinks my happiness is more important than others. So in this way, you can say that self-cherishing acts on the basis of grasping at a self. So the question is, what happens then when we leave samsara and become an arhat? Right, so currently I'm not looking at the Mahayana path. If we were to follow the Hinayana path and we would attain our own state of liberation, what happens to our self-cherishing attitude? Well, if we haven't developed great compassion, as here is Untitled realizes, which observes all sentient beings without exception, with a wish for them to be free from suffering, we still have an attitude of cherishing ourselves, in that we have attained a state of liberation, the state of an arhat, and we prefer to remain in that state for eons on end, till the rest of time, just enjoying the bliss or the happiness, the well-being that is afforded by liberation. So in that sense, you can say that you still cherish yourself more than you cherish others if you don't develop great compassion. So you might be an arhat, but still you can be said to have an attitude of self-cherishing. But then you might wonder, if it's self-cherishing, is it necessarily a negative sense of self-cherishing? Sorry? What self will I be cherishing? I'll be cherishing my conventionally existing self, the one that arises in dependence. So here's Untitled realizes have left, arhats have left samsara. They don't have ignorance anymore. They've eliminated ignorance. So the type of self-cherishing that they have is different to the one that we have. In a sense that with our sense of self-cherishing, when we think that our happiness is more important than others' happiness, we often then use that in order to neglect others, not only to neglect others, but to ignore others. So we sometimes work in order to accomplish our own happiness, even if it comes at the expense of others. So that's a negative sense of self-cherishing. Here is Untitled to realize that arhats will never do that. They will never harm others or abuse others, use others in order to get the happiness and well-being. So they still kind of think that they still, you could say, have an intended state of liberation. They still remain in that state of peace for their own sake alone for as long as they want, without thinking that I have to completely eliminate the suffering of others. I have to become, for myself, to become a Buddha in order to liberate others. So they don't think about it like that, but in no way they're going to harm others in order to get their own happiness and well-being. So in that sense, you can say that there is like a positive self-cherishing attitude and a negative self-cherishing attitude. We, in most cases, have a negative one where we often do not shy away from harming others in order to get what we want. But the positive one would be, of course, in no way doing that, but still being concerned about one's own happiness and well-being to an extent in which we don't think that it is our responsibility to work for the benefit of others. So Kate is saying, cherishing in terms of appreciating the precious rebirth and make most of the opportunities of and freedoms as its positive sense of cherishing. Well, you can say that if you want to, for example, if you want to cherish yourself in a smart way, you will appreciate your freedoms and opportunities, cherish them, and you make the most out of them in cherishing others. You know, so that's one way that you can think about it, right? The best way to cherish yourself is to cherish others. Mm. 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 So yeah, so I'll just repeat your question to the people at home. So what about when you kind of when you start to get into Buddhism, you are introduced to the Buddhist tradition, you start to think of the suffering and the problems of others, and you still like the means to be of benefit to others. So could you say that at this point it is self-cherishing when you become overwhelmed by how many problems and sufferings there are and you cannot bear it? Yeah. So we speak often about the need to combine both wisdom and method. So method devoid of wisdom is of little benefit, but also wisdom without method is also dangerous. In a sense that method without wisdom, for example, if we develop compassion to others, but we don't have the wisdom to do anything about it, then it could be just frustrating. Mm. So Chugila is also saying that just by abstaining from harming others, you benefit others, because then if you desist from harming others, there's less fear around you, less conflict. Sorry? You know, in terms of speech, yeah. When you, when you stop harming others with your speech, then there's less fear around you, less conflicts, less arguments, less disharmony. So even in doing that, you could say that you're already benefiting others. So then I think that, you know, at the beginning, indeed, it is possible that when you see all the problems and difficulties of living beings around you, you become quite disheartened, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming. Often it becomes overwhelming. Then one thing is, I think, when you find that it is too overwhelming, you cannot bear it, you can say that it could be a sign of maybe some form of self-cherishing that is involved with that. But also you can look at it in a positive side. It's actually you are affected by the misery of others. You're not closing your heart to it. And then you need to think that I need to do something about it. So not to allow that to make you despondent or being incapable of doing anything, but to think that the only way for me to be of maximum benefit to others is to become Buddha. Of course, there are other things that we can do for the sake of others. So we can temporarily work for the sake of others in helping them to overcome problems. But if we only put our effort into temporary means to help others and delay our postponement of Buddhahood, then we're not going to be capable of being able to a great number of beings for a very long time. So it's not to say that we should do one or the other. I think that in any given situation, we should look at what's the best thing to do. Sometimes I think that it could happen that we get too overwhelmed by suffering. We then get involved with a particular thing in which we help others, and we'll allow it to take over completely, that we don't allow any time for continuing to develop our mind. So finding the right balance is probably something that we just need to assess as we go. So then continuing with that, with the second position of cherishing ourself is different to self-grasping. Looking for my tutorial notes, there it is. So again, in thinking of those two verses from the Guru Puja and from Shantideva's guide, this chronic disease of cherishing myself is the cause giving rise to my unsought suffering. Right, my problem is self-cherishing. Perceiving this, I seek your blessings to blame, begrudge, and destroy the monstrous demon of grasping at the self. So here you can say that the Guru Puja alludes to the negative type of cherishing ourself. The negative type of cherishing ourself, which causes to harm others, is based on self-grasping. If I destroy my self-grasping, my ignorance of grasping at a self, I'll also be able to rid myself of the negative type of self-cherishing. So that's the take on the Guru Puja verse. And the Bodhisattva way of life says, if whatever harm, fear, and suffering in this world all arise from grasping at the self, then what use is that great goes to me. That comes at a section of discarding a self-cherishing attitude. So indeed, when you think of all the problems, all the harm, fear, and suffering in the world, from a sutra perspective, it all comes from ignorance of grasping at a self. And this is what Shantideva says here. It all comes from ignorance. So what is that great goes to me? If we destroy that, as we said before, we will also destroy the negative side or the negative type of an attitude of cherishing ourselves. So then what is the focal point and the focal aspect, the focal object and the aspect or mode of apprehension of self-cherishing according to the second position? Well, focal object is ourself. The mode of apprehension is taking your own happiness and suffering as primary. In other words, more important than oneself. Geshe Jamming was saying a similar thing. So the focal object is, rather than oneself, you can say that also one's happiness. So there's still an emphasis on me. This is my happiness. The mode of apprehension is taking it to be more important. But then when I discussed with Geshe Jamming the difference between him and Geshe Tashturing's position, he said that, yeah, you can say either. It was kind of non-committal in saying that you either have to say this or have to say that. But he certainly did, I discussed with him Geshe Tshogrim's position. It was kind of saying that, no, in no way you can hold this position. So, so there is kind of disagreement here, but again, I think that the merits to both positions, and I think that at the end, actually, they come down on the same thing. I mean, in terms of the practical application. So then, according to Geshe Tastring and Geshe Jamming, is self-cherishing an afflictive obscuration? Definitely no. It's definitely no, because hearers and solitude realizers also have a type of self-cherishing that causes them to dwell in that state, in the state of liberation. I'm speaking about ahats. So hearers and solitude realizer ahats have the type of self-cherishing that causes them to dwell in that state, ahatship, for a long time without thinking that my responsibility now is to benefit others or to free others from suffering. I mean, of course, I think that if you were to speak about it with a Hinayana practitioner, I think that they will feel a great responsibility for the well-being of others. So I think that saying that they will not have that thought that benefiting others is my responsibility, I don't think that they will have that thought. Probably I should have said that they will not have the thought that it is my responsibility to free everyone without exception from suffering. They will not have, in other words, an emphasis on the practice of great compassion. They have compassion, but probably not great compassion. So that being the case, is self-cherishing a wrong consciousness? According to them, it cannot be a wrong consciousness. And here, you might ask, if self-cherishing is not a wrong consciousness, what about self-cherishing thinks that my happiness is more important than others' happiness, right? So what about So what about, with can you approach an attitude of cherishing yourself from a different perspective? Like, for example, if you cherish yourself in a certain way, if you take care of yourself, then others can also feel more happy or kind of better if you take care of yourself, which means that if you take care of your own mind, right? If you put an emphasis on taking care of your own mind, developing your mind, being more tolerant, a sense of concern for others, it will make others be happier. Well, is that what you mean? Yeah. Yeah, it's not for selfish. Yeah, but you can call that a type of self-cherishing, but it is not like a negative type of self-cherishing where you're trying to get your own happiness, even if it comes at the expense of others. Now, often Izana says that if you want to be selfish, just be wisely selfish, cherish others, so when we think of, in order to protect others, I need to practice loving kindness, I need to practice patience, I need to practice generosity. All those things can be practiced with an orientation of what I need to do. But the more you develop your mind in that way, the more you develop the method side and the wisdom side, also you affect others. So you take care of yourself, but also you take care of others. Then when you so in terms of your training in doing that, you can have two orientations. Like, for example, you could say that my way of improving myself would be, first of all, to work on my own mind. This is my focus. I'm working on my own mind in order to protect myself. If I protect myself, I'll be better. I'll be happier. My mental state will be better. As a byproduct, also others will be protected because I will stop harming them. I'll stop being abusive or envious or proud or what have you. So others will also be affected by that. So you cherish others, but it also, you cherish yourself in a particular way. You're not seeing yourself as being more important, but you take care of yourself. Or you don't think that your own happiness is more important than others, but you think that at least what I can do is take care of myself. Or your orientation might be such that you place an emphasis on others, thinking that I must, as much as I can, be of benefit to others. If I put my emphasis on others and stop emphasizing my own importance, then also naturally I will come to behave in a better way. So if I emphasize others, they are more important than me. There's no way that I can act in a way that is solely self-interested. So that's another way of kind of thinking that if I'm of benefit to others, my own sense of self-cherishing will be reduced. So I think that kind of both of them are ways of working on yourself and then making others be better or protected, happier, and so forth. But here, from a kind of strictly speaking, pure Mahayana attitude, you completely take away the focus on yourself, in that you take away the mind thinking that I must attain happiness and well-being just for myself. You think that I have to do it for the sake of others. So through that, you stop harming others, but you also then improve your own mind, and thereby your situation as a byproduct becomes better. So then, the question was, is self-cherishing a wrong consciousness? It is not. But what about, for example, thinking that my happiness is more important than others? Others are infinite in number, and I am just one individual. So how could it be that self-cherishing is not a wrong consciousness if I think that my happiness is more important than others? So from this perspective, we kind of, from Geshe Jaman and Geshe Tsultrim's position, this, since hearers and Sartre realizes do have arhats, do have self-cherishing, you have to say that it is not a wrong consciousness. But if you think that my happiness is more important than others, it has to be wrong, right? So I think that maybe you have to say that the negative type of self-cherishing, which you do think that my happiness is more important than others, it is a wrong consciousness. But then the one that, let's say, kind of pure Theravada practitioners have in thinking that what I can do for the time being is take care of myself. In no way I am going to harm others. I'm going to take up the ethical discipline in which I will abstain from harming others, from the 10 non-virtues. So I will not kill, not steal, and so forth. But the main orientation is in order for me to become liberated. So it's a type of, you could say, positive type of self-cherishing, but you don't overtly, directly, explicitly think that I'm doing it because my happiness is more important than others. You're doing it because you think that currently what I can do is just take care of myself. Maybe I'm not strong enough to take care of others, but at least I'm not going to harm them because they're still like me, wanting, they want to be happy and they do not want to suffer. So Oli is saying, do the Theravada have the understanding of the difference in liberation and enlightenment that the Mahayana propounds? Or do they maintain that enlightenment is no longer possible and that we must be happy with liberation only? If so, what reason does the Mahayana give to refute this? I think that you can approach that in two ways. You can approach that in looking at the traditional system of tenets and then looking at the Hinayana tenets and the Mahayana tenets and see what type of philosophical views they have. So that's one way of addressing that. The second way of addressing that is to actually have conversations with contemporary Hinayanists, which at least on a personal level, I haven't done that enough. So, I think that you'll find maybe sometimes that they could have a presentation that is slightly different to what we study in tenets, but I don't know enough. So at least from the point of view of tenets, you can be a Theravada practitioner, which means that your aim is attaining the state of liberation, and you also don't believe that the Buddha taught the way to become Buddha. So the Buddha, you believe that Buddhas exist, or the Buddha, the historical Buddha, did attain the state of enlightenment. He taught us the Dhamma, but the Dhamma tells us how to attain the state of liberation, but it doesn't tell us how to become Buddhas. And therefore, you could say that the Buddha did not teach the Mahayana, that the Mahayana was a later creation. So that's one philosophical view of some Hinayana schools of thought. Then you could have Hinayanists that believe that the Buddha did teach the Mahayana, that the Buddha did teach the way to become Buddha, but they think that for the time being, it's just too hard. It's too hard for me. It takes such a long time. There is a vast number of living beings that are suffering, and I don't have the power to free them from suffering. So at least what I can do now is take care of myself. I can attain the state of liberation, at least for myself. So in that sense, you can hold a Mahayana view, but your practice will still be a Theravada practice. You can be a Theravadian practice. Sorry, you can be a Theravadian in having a Theravada practice. And also a philosophical view is Theravada. You can also be someone that believes in the Mahayana view. Sorry, you can be someone that practices the Mahayana. That's what I wanted to do, to practice the Mahayana with having developed bodhicitta, but still your philosophical view is of the Hinayana. That's also possible. Like, for example, I think that Dharmakirti was, I think, one of them. Dharmakirti or Dignaga, not sure. Sorry? Well, you could be a Mahayana person in that you've developed bodhicitta. You've developed bodhicitta and you've even entered the Mahayana path. But without developing the wisdom of the Mahayana, which is the wisdom of the view of emptiness, the correct view of emptiness, you'll only go to a certain extent, to a certain length on the path of accumulation. You will never go beyond the medium part of the path of accumulation. So the path of accumulation is divided into three parts. There's the small, the medium, and the great. So when you attend the great part of the path of accumulation, sorry? No, just different. It's kind of small, medium, and great, just kind of parts of the path of accumulation. It doesn't have a connection with the small, medium, and great scope. So when you kind of reach the great part of the path of accumulation, you necessarily have attained calm abiding that is focused on emptiness, which means that you necessarily have realized emptiness. And the emptiness here is, from the Prasangika view, is emptiness of inherent existence, which means that you will have to realize emptiness according to the Mahayana Prasangika view. The last point possible would be somewhere on the medium part of the path of accumulation. You could have realized it before, way before, even before entering the path, but that's your last chance, so to speak. You will never be able to proceed beyond the medium part of the path of accumulation without realizing emptiness. So you could be a Bodhisattva with amazing compassion, amazing bodhicitta, but you're still developing your wisdom. And until you develop the wisdom of the Prasangika view, you'll not be able to go beyond the medium part of the path of accumulation. If you find it a little bit kind of too elaborate, well, we're going to speak about it more in the future. So as I said, it's sometimes just like learning a new language. Things start to become more reasonable as you go. So the next question is, do hearers and so to realize the ahats of self-cherishing in the mind? According to Geshe and Geshe Jaman, those who dwell on the bliss of peace do cherish themselves. So they have the positive side of the positive type of self-cherishing, not the negative side. Those who embark on the Mahayana path and work on developing bodhicitta meditate on great compassion, and they also meditate on cherishing others. Particularly if they've developed uncontrived compassion, you could say that they do no longer have an attitude of cherishing themselves, they cherish other living beings. So then, are self-cherishing and cherishing others contradictory? According to Geshe Tsultrim, they are not contradictory because, as I said, you could have, now often we say that in order to eliminate self-cherishing, you need to meditate on cherishing others. You need to meditate on the drawbacks of cherishing yourself and the benefits of cherishing others. So the question is it that by the only way to eliminate self-cherishing is to meditate on cherishing others? When we think of the view that Geshe Tsultrim expressed yesterday, where he took cherishing oneself to be a type of grasping at a self, if you eliminate grasping at a self, you will have also eliminated self-cherishing. So you don't have to meditate on cherishing others. You can just eliminate grasping at a self, and self-cherishing will be gone. So in that sense, you can say that they're not contradictory. I mean, one question to ask Geshe Tsultrim then, if they're not contradictory because of his position, what about being able to eliminate, if you don't attain a state of liberation and you meditate on cherishing others, can you eliminate cherishing yourself by cherishing others, even if you don't attain the state of liberation? This is something that probably we can ask in debating it with Geshe. According to Geshe Tashering and Geshe Jamin, they are contradictory in that the way to eliminate cherishing oneself is to develop an attitude of cherishing others. So for example, to enter into the Mahayana path, you need to develop uncontrived mind of enlightenment. When you do that, you have developed an attitude of cherishing others and you've abandoned self-cherishing. This is how they said it before. You have abandoned cherishing yourself. Anyway, that's the discussion about self-cherishing and cherishing others. What is self-cherishing according to Geshe Jamin, Geshe Tashering, Geshe Tsultrim? Before we continue, I'm wondering if you have any questions, people at home or people here? Yeah, so all the Geshes that we hear are all Gelugpas. They all come from the same monastery, not only from the same monastery, from the same college. So Sera Monastery has two main colleges, there's Sera Je and Sera Me. All the Geshes that we have here, and most of the Geshes in the FMT organization come from Sera Je Monastery. The reason for that is that Lama Zopa Rinpoche is also from Sera Je Monastery. So the system works on like a system of acquaintance, right? So you have many people that you know in the monastery. You have a better way of scouting for new Geshes. So therefore, most of them come from Sera Je Monastery, but you also have some others from Ganden and from Drepung and other monasteries. You have some from Kopan Monastery also. But then still, when you look at, Geshe Tsultrim had other teachers, Geshe Jamin and Geshe Tashering have more points in common, but still sometimes Geshe Jamin did not agree with Geshe Tsultrim's, with Geshe Tashering's position and vice versa. Sometimes they kind of, in the way of debate, sometimes you try to instill fear in your opponent. So kind of intimidating them to concede defeat is part of their debate tactic. So they were quite happy to do it to each other. I mean, Geshe Tashering was much more senior, so Geshe Jamin was still quite respectful. He didn't get to the point where kind of Geshe Tashering was bleeding and then Geshe Jamin took the sword and slashed him. But Geshe Tashering kind of had no hesitation in doing that. Yeah. Yeah, not only to Geshe-Jaman, to anyone. So yeah, it's an excellent way of beating someone in debate. Anyway, so I suppose it's not always clear distinction between self-care and self-cherishing. Well, if you think that, if you think of self-cherishing in that my happiness is more important than the happiness of others, my suffering is much more significant from the suffering of others, this is not self-care. This is self-cherishing. If you think of self-care in terms of, I need to make sure that I'm well, that I have enough to get by so that I can develop my mind. And if I don't have enough to get by, if I don't have enough to develop my mind, I will not be able to be of benefit to others. Then you see also, I think that you see the taking care of yourself as a branch of taking care of others. If you let yourself fall, decline, and so forth, how will you be able to be of benefit to others? So that's how I look at the difference between them. So then I created a list in the class notes, which will be distributed today, of the disadvantages of cherishing oneself and the benefits of cherishing others. I think that there's not much, we don't need to discuss that. I think that you can look at the verses and do it for yourself. So let's just read it, maybe just one list. The disadvantages of cherishing oneself, that's from the verses that we've covered in class. If for myself I cause harm to others, I shall fall into the hells and the like. Desiring eminence for myself, I shall become of unfortunate migrations. If I employ others for my own purpose, I myself shall experience servitude and the like. Whatever sufferings there is in the world, it all comes from desiring myself to be happy. I shall not accomplish the state of Buddhahood, and even in cyclic existence shall have no happiness. And even the purpose of this life will not be fulfilled. Right, so those are the points that Shantideva said with respect to the disadvantages of cherishing oneself. So it's really important that I think in our meditation and equalizing and exchanging self with others, that we think about it again and again. Not only think about it again and again, but also come up with experiences from our own life, how through an attitude of cherishing ourselves, we keep ourselves away from developing bodhicitta. We create a distance from ourselves and Buddhahood. We do not accomplish the purpose of future lives, but also we say that since time without beginning and up until now, we've been trying to remove our suffering and to become happy through an attitude of cherishing ourselves and thinking that it's all right to take advantage of others, to harm others. It's not a big deal so long as I'm happy, and we still find ourselves in situations that we experience suffering. So as Shantideva said, look at what needed just to say more. Look at the difference between you and Buddhas. Buddhas work for the sake of others and we work for our own sake. So who is smarter, right? So yeah, look at the difference. Then we have the benefits of cherishing others. If for the sake of others I cause harm to myself, I shall acquire all that is magnificent. I mean, I cause harm to myself here, we need to understand it in a particular way. I cause harm to myself in a sense that, for example, if for the sake of others, I will offer my possessions, money, and so I will practice generosity. I will practice patience. I will accept defeat upon myself. I will offer the victory to others. I will practice patience and so forth. I shall attain magnificence. If I desire eminence for others, I shall acquire honor in good migrations. If I use myself for the sake of others, I shall experience lordliness and the like. How I like this word lordliness. It's like, since it comes with like a magnificent coat and a hat. Anyway, whatever joy there is in the world, it all comes from desiring others to be happy. And Buddhahood comes from cherishing others. So these are the drawbacks and benefits. And I think that you can look at the text and probably draw more drawbacks and more benefits to cherishing oneself versus cherishing others. So then today we started with that complicated part of how we practice with envy, competitiveness, and pride. Did you find that section complicated? Do you find it confusing? Yeah, so you said that you discussed it in the discussion group and also in yeah. And if you look at it from multiple angles, then it starts to make sense. It becomes easier. So I think that I had a conversation with Yeshe, and she made a really nice point. Kind of, I thought that kind of it was really, really stayed with me. And I think that she said it in relation to the point that Geshe-la made. So sometimes we say that kind of you put a mirror in front of yourself, kind of you look yourself in the mirror and you see your faults. So it is a powerful practice when kind of you're able to see your own faults and recognize them. But then we react even stronger to the same faults being expressed by others. So we're not sufficing just with putting a mirror in front of ourselves. In this practice, we actually go further on. We imagine that others are talking about our problems when we acknowledge them. So Khenpo Kumpel makes it very clear. I totally agree with you. So so then what I try to do at home is to look at Khenpo Kumpel's presentation, also what we've done today in class. Also, I looked at 2 other commentaries. One of them was of his own, and I tried to, in my obsessive compulsive chart thing, I tried to put this on a chart. So in using Khenpo Kumpel's presentation, it says that when practicing envy, competitiveness, and pride towards those who are better off, equal, and worse off, the reason for this practice is as soon as even the slightest virtue appears in the mind stream, our mind stream, there are 3 defilements that follow in its wake. And the defilements are envy, competitiveness, and pride. So here, this whole discussion comes under the banner. Sorry, I should have put it on the screen. So the whole discussion comes under the banner of how we reduce the self-cherishing and how we develop an attitude of cherishing others. So we do that also in conjunction with taking care of our mind. So if we develop good qualities, there's a danger that envy, competitiveness, or pride will arise. So here, this practice of changing our perspective is done, I think, for 2 reasons. One of them is you can use that as a way for enhancing an attitude of cherishing others, but also you can use it as a way of reducing your own afflictive states of mind, envy, competitiveness, and pride. So what Shantideva does here, I think that as you discussed it before and we've discussed it in class, you put yourself in others' position, in others' shoes. So in the commentary that we've covered in class with Geshe Tsultrim, we spoke about the Bodhisattva Devadatta. I think that it is somewhat more difficult to understand. So let's look at the commentary that we've covered in class. Just a second. For example, in verse 141, the commentary says, when the Bodhisattva Devadatta meditates on exchanging Seth and others. So I think that stating it like that is a little bit problematic in that it can cause confusion. Here, Getza Dhamma says, take, for example, a Bodhisattva. And we might think that, why do we have to speak about a Bodhisattva who has envy, competitiveness, and pride, and so forth? That's one problem. Then Devadatta also was someone that was renowned for being an opponent of the Buddha, right? So I guess that here when it speaks about the Bodhisattva Devadatta, we speak about not the cousin of the Buddha, but someone else, right? So there was a cousin of the Buddha called Devadatta that was always trying to undermine the Buddha, was like his arch enemy, so to speak. So I think that here, when we read this commentary, rather than thinking of when the Bodhisattva master Devadatta meditates on exchanging self with others, we can think, take for example me, the one that wants to develop bodhicitta. Now, I might have developed bodhicitta, or you guys might have developed bodhicitta. I personally have not have done it yet. But take, for example, myself. I do practice the exchange of self with others. So what I do is I think about myself now, and I think of the text speaks about those who are lower than me or inferior to me. Now, the word in Tibetan for that is memba, which can be understood in different ways. So I think that the word inferior in English, of course, it carries a very pejorative, a strong connotation. Also, lower is also a little bit strong. The word memba in Tibetan also has the idea that those who are just not doing as well as you, they're not as well off as you, they're worse off. And people can be worse off from different perspectives without turning it into a pejorative term, right? So they could be less wealthy, not as educated as you, not as famous as you, and so forth. So they're worse off than you. So then here Shantideva says, let's put ourselves in the shoes of those who are doing not as good as us, and look at ourselves from their perspective, right? So we're attempting to practice bodhicitta, to practice equalizing, exchanging self with others, but we're still a bundle of a self-cherishing attitude. We are a bundle of a self-cherishing attitude, but also a bundle of other afflictions, because we haven't abandoned our afflictions yet. So we have envy, and we have pride, and we have anger, and we have attachment, and so forth. So we're trying to look at ourselves from the point of view of others. We often think that we're doing really well. We're doing actually better than others. And we also sometimes have either an explicit or an implicit sense of disdain to others. So we look at ourselves from the perspective of others. And then in the first part, we see that although we might think well of ourselves, we're actually not doing that great. We're not caring for others enough, particularly for those who are doing worse off than us. We're looking down on them. So how does it feel like to be looked down upon? How does it feel like to be ignored? How does it feel like not to be taken care of? Right, so we'll put ourselves in their shoes and look at ourselves, and first of all, recognize that not only we are not doing that great in terms of practicing the Mahayana path, but also we have blind spots, often that we don't recognize. But also, so we use that in order to bring down or to decrease our afflictions. But also on top of that, Khenpo Kumpen says in his text that if you get used to thinking about it from others' perspective, then you can develop compassion, a heightened sense of compassion to them. Because when you think of how it'd be like to be worse off than others, how does it feel like to be neglected? How does it feel like to be disrespected, not to be educated, or to be bereft of possessions and so forth? How does it feel like? So when you put yourself in the shoes of others, and you try to emulate the feeling, and looking at how those who are doing better off than them are feeling, there's a much greater basis for the development of compassion. So it's a powerful practice, because normally when we think of practicing compassion, we think of we think that I want to liberate those who are bereft of suffering. Sorry, I want to liberate those who are tormented by suffering from their suffering. So there's, I think, sometimes a tendency to think that I'm here, I'm not suffering that much at the moment, and there are others, they are out there, and I feel compassion towards them. But here, Shantideva takes it a step further. He says that actually to have a greater compassion, to identify with the suffering, put yourself in their shoes and see how to, think of how does it feel like to be in that situation. So when we think about it like that, I think that those verses become easier to understand. The words might be a little bit complicated because it goes back and forth in a language that is quite packed. But if you think about it like that, I think that it's easier, more intuitive. So Olaf is saying, his batch, where is it? Stefan Batchelor translation points out that in verse 141 to 144, 54, the role of I and other is literally reversed. Thus I become all and all others become he, becomes oneself. Confusing. Yeah, it is confusing. So I put it here, not here. So what I try to do is to put it in front of me on a chart. So practicing with those who are envy of oneself, right? So we are doing better off than others. We are practitioners of bodhicitta, we're doing better off than others. So others are envious of ourselves. So it's interesting that Geshe said today that in his Honour's presentation, he speaks about pride. So looking at those two commentaries, it seems that kind of I managed to maybe sort out this confusion. So before changing our perspective, before putting ourselves in others' position, then I'm a practitioner of bodhicitta. I have qualities, honor, wealth, knowledge. I pretend to practice love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Therefore, I have pride. So currently I have pride and others are envious of me. Then then other sentient beings have many faults, they're poor, they're uneducated, etc. Their attitude is envy towards those who are better off. So when exchanging our perspective, then me is going to be my old self. I'm no longer going to be Katsun. I am now others. And I'm looking at my old self as he, that person. So from the point of view of others, looking at my old self and thinking that he doesn't do enough for the sake of others. He's not really a compassionate and generous person. Why is he being so arrogant? Right, that's from the perspective of others. So after you think about it like that, Khenpo Kumpel says in his presentation, when you put yourself in the position and in their position and recognize their sorrows and generate compassion towards them, recognize that high and low are relative. This is also in relation to Shantideva's words, of course. You might be doing better than some, but there are others who do better than you. Everyone has Buddha nature. Think that you should help them rather than despising them. You should help them because everyone has a Buddha nature. So it seems that we're running out of time. I'll send these class notes today out. I think that Kate asked here something. Let's see. Some people exert themselves in trying to help others in outward ways that cause their health to decline and mind to become disturbed. Is the advice clear in matching the outlawed actions with the capacity or capability to undertake them? So we did cover that actually a few sessions ago. Someone asked about compassion and burning out of compassion. And one of the verses that we've covered before spoke about the type of compassion that bodhisattvas have and the compassion that we might have now, which is still tainted with some form of attachment. So long as our compassion is tainted with a form of attachment for that long, it would be hard for us. So we need skillful means. We need to make sure that we reduce our attachment, but also we need to make sure that we do not burn out. That we develop wisdom together with our compassion. All right. So let's leave it here for now. I'll send out the review questions tonight. And I'm also going to send out an exam this weekend. Hopefully I remember to do it. And we'll meet again. We shall meet again next week. Thank you. Due to this virtue, might quickly become a Guru Buddha. Indeed, all transmigrative beings without exception to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhicitta not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all powerful Chimrazik Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. You uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves in the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Protector of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you.